Welcome, fight fans,
to the Fighters Voice Kick-Ass Podcast.
Your Fight Talk Authority.
Not to mention the most entertaining and talked about podcast with your kick-ass host, Richard Ortiz.
You mad? Come at me, bro.
And his loyal kick-ass co-host, Senor Cole Escovedo.
Streaming live and worldwide.
Coming to you all the way live from a little place somewhere in Cali. The Fighters Voice
Kick-Ass Podcast.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're live here. I'm your host, Richard Ortiz, of the Fighters Voice Kick-Ass Podcast. It's Wednesday night. It's a little after 6. Hit a little bit of technical difficulties, but what fighter in this world does not? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to jump right into it because I want to save every minute, every second for our guest. And I don't even want to read his resume because that'll take the whole hour, ladies and gentlemen. But right now, I mean, the man is wearing many hats, but right now he is the on-air personality to the new boxing network that's taken the nation by storm, and that's Ring City, USA. Ladies and gentlemen, Curran Bhatia. Welcome to the show, Curran.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that intro. Wow, love it. All right, as long as you guys are happy and liking the product, then I'm very happy. So that's awesome. That's good to hear.
Absolutely, man, and we're happy. We're satisfied. I'm digging the shirt. I'm digging the teeth. You're all done up, man. And, you take your personal makeup artist with you, even on the road, even at home, man.
No makeup today. Not a makeup guy, but maybe one day, I guess. Collared shirt, man. We got, trying to look good for you, man.
I appreciate it. I threw the hat away and, I got to make sure I do my best as well, but also feel comfortable and bring the viewers, the fans, and the followers, most importantly, what they want is boxing news, boxing talk, and just the fighter's voice. I want to ask you, man, growing up, was broadcasting, producing, engineering, the whole nine, was that something you really wanted to be involved in, or were you a boxer, or were you an athlete? What was the whole story growing up?
So it's a good question. And thank you again for that amazing intro. For me growing up, always loved film and TV. And even in high school days, I created a film festival at my high school, the first one there. Always loved it. And in terms of sports, I love sports. Who doesn't love sports growing up? Played a lot of different sports. And I never actually necessarily boxed myself or fought myself. I've trained in boxing, but I've never got, into the ring for like a professional match or anything like that. But I love combat sports. I love boxing. I love MMA. And what I love about them is I feel like it's the absolute top in terms of competition, the highest level of competition. And what I mean by that is if you look at other sports, hockey or baseball or whatever, when they get really into it, when they get amped, right? Like if a pitcher throws a ball at a hitter, they charge the mound and they fight, right? We see that in every sport. In hockey, drop the gloves and you fight. And I think in boxing or MMA, it's like you're already fighting. There's nowhere else to go. There's nothing else to do. And so I've always been fascinated by combat sports, always loved combat sports. And I went to NYU. I was able to continue my work in the film and TV space. And it was, call it fate. It was whatever it was. I got the position at HBO. It's in HBO Sports, and I got to produce and direct on the documentary series 24/7, live boxing events, work on the show Fight Game with Jim Lampley. And so it was kind of the perfect mix of film and TV and combat sports.
Let me. I'm glad you slowed it down right there because I was about to stop you, but I want to let you finish. What was it like being on set with 24/7? Because that was actually my favorite on HBO. Watching that, and then the production, the storyline, the voiceovers, what have you, the whole nine.
Yeah, thank you. It was an amazing show to work on. Some really, really great people. I learned so much, and I got to do a bunch of different roles on that show. Started, as a production assistant, production associate, working in like an edit room. And then I got to work my way up to a field producer or director, kind of in the field, working with the fighters and our crew and managing our crew. And then being the producer of the show for certain episodes, getting to write the episodes, getting to interview the fighters. And so for me, it was a dream come true. And what is it like? I mean, it's you're embedded with these fighters 24/7, right? You're in camp with them. It's a team of different camera people and a field producer, like I said, and they're there for weeks at a time, and they're capturing everything. And then that footage gets sent back to New York to the edit room, and there's the producer there working with an editor, writing a script and kind of piecing that story together, putting together the important storylines. And I mean, you know this, everyone knows this, that's what makes it so interesting, right? When you get invested into these fighters about why they're doing this, why are they going into combat, right? There's usually a reason. And so just being able to show that is always great.
You know, there's one particular one that stands out. I remember De La Hoya and Mayweather, that whole series. I mean, that one really stands out. And also the very last one, which I got recorded at home because, you know, HBO Boxing was shutting it down. But that's something that I wish HBO would still be a part of, because that was golden, man. They were the originals, and then later on you had the other networks kind of make their own will.
No, certainly. It definitely was the gold standard. It definitely elevated sports documentaries, the follow doc, you could call it. And I think what 24/7 did really well was it wasn't just following the fighters, but it did it in a cinematic, artistic way. They had really great music. We had great writers. Aaron Cohen, one of the really good writers for that series. We had the top DPs, director of photographies, or cameramen, camera crews, top editors. Everyone was a top position, and I think that production value, right, that really elevated the storytelling. And to your point, I think a lot of other networks and things like that saw what they were doing and were able to adapt them themselves. You see that more often now in other places, but I think HBO was definitely a pioneer in that.
Oh, absolutely. Down to even the voiceovers, the music, everything. It was something looking forward to. Even the trailer. I mean, once it would end, it would say scenes from from part 2 or part 3, and it would leave you holding on, you know. And no, just some great stuff. And I got to ask you, what was it like working with Jim Lampley? I mean, a legend, pioneer to this day.
Absolutely. I think Jim is one of the best, if not the best, play-by-play announcer who's ever done it. And I was lucky enough to literally have the seat right next to him for some of the biggest fights. I remember we were watching Manny Pacquiao fight, and I was right next to the ring, looking up to see the great Manny Pacquiao, and to my right was Jim Lampley, and I could watch him work. And that definitely was a motivation for me in terms of a lot of my work before was a producer-director behind the camera, and then I wanted to I've made the shift in front of the camera as on-air announcer. A lot of my motivation did come from Jim Lampley because he's such a great storyteller. And if you listen to Jim Lampley call a fight, anyone could say, oh, you know, there's a left hook. Great. If you look at Jim Lampley's type of call, if you go back to, for example, when Pacquiao was fighting Antonio Margarito, right? Obviously, Margarito was the much larger man. So Margarito is kind of charging at Pacquiao. Pacquiao's stuck in the corner. And Jim's call, one of many famous calls, was, this is Pacquiao's nightmare, locked in a trap with a larger man. If you just think about the words, the way he's describing what's going on, it's storytelling at the top level in real time. So it was an honor for me to work with him, to learn through osmosis. And since I've moved on air, I've definitely been in touch with Jim, had dinner with him a few times, just picking his brain, trying to learn more as much as I can from his great mind.
I remember those calls, man. I remember there was one similar to chop, 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 and the tree would come down, right, George? And he was talking to George Foreman, and you could visualize the cartoon, the animated cartoon, for example, along with his viewership and just calling the fights. Yes, he did bring a storyline to it, and he brought his own charisma and his own touch with it. Now, I got to ask you, how was Larry Merchant and also that field?
Yeah, I mean, Larry, I've been lucky enough to interview Larry for my podcast, Ask the Experts podcast.
Awesome. We're about to get you about that, too, because I want to let everybody know what exactly that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to chat about that as well. But to answer your question, Larry, obviously is a really good storyteller. I think what Larry's does great is he obviously injects his opinion, and he's not afraid at all to ask the question to anyone at any time. And I think that's what you want in post-fight interviewer, especially. And now for me, lucky enough to do the post-fight interviews for Ring City USA on NBC Sports. It's an honor for me. And I definitely obviously have a different style than Larry, but the one thing that I remember from Larry is he wasn't afraid to ask the tough question, and I've tried to also do that as well. Not be afraid to ask the tough question at the right moment, the question that we're all thinking as viewers. Yeah. Larry was able to do that. So Larry, Jim, Roy Jones, all at Max Kellerman, all of the other great announcers. I mean, these were all really talented people, and I think people watching at home, you probably think, and we've all bin guilty of this, any sporting event you watch, say, oh, I could do that. And I can now speak from experience. It's a very different experience when the bright lights are on and there's millions of people watching, and you have to, speak eloquently. You have to ask the right questions. You have to react to what someone else is saying. It's very difficult. And all of those announcers were really great at that, and I learned a ton from them.
Well, you learn from the best. I mean, you
Yes.
paid your dues from the bottom up, and you learn from the best. And now you're the man that all the winners talk to. Even some of the losers, when they leave everything in the ring, they always want to talk to the winner. But when both men leave it in the ring, even the one who didn't get the victory, he needs to be heard as well at times. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I like giving equal time if I can. Obviously, with a broadcast, you never know in terms of the length or what the commercial responsibilities are, or what the off-air commitment is, what's the next program. There's a lot of different things that come into play in terms of the time that's allowed. I've always been in favor of doing more interviews than less. If we're not able to do an interview with a fighter who lost live on air, then I usually try to do it post-fight, and we'll put it up on the Ring City YouTube channel. If not, I'll try to do it elsewhere, for example, on my podcast or elsewhere, my YouTube page, things like that. Because I do think one thing that we should take away as fans is maybe the stigma that if you lose, you're done. I think there's nothing wrong with losing. If you look at the top fighter in the sport right now, I think the consensus pound for pound one is probably Canelo Alvarez. Canelo lost to Mayweather. We all know that. That doesn't diminish anything that he's done. So there's nothing wrong with losing. Anyone who laces them up and gets in the ring for our entertainment deserves respect and deserves credit. And there's nothing wrong with daring to be great and having a loss. So to your point, I definitely think it's important to speak to the winners and the losers.
Before we get into the podcast, because I definitely want to talk about your podcast, tell us about the new series that's coming out. Is that something that's only going to come through this fall here, or are we planning on being locked in? And I'm talking about Ring City, USA.
Yeah, Ring City USA is going to be continuing in 2021. There was an article on Boxing Scene which had the details if anyone wants to see for the first fight. The first fight is February 25th. That's going to be Brandon Adams versus Sergey Bohachuk. So that's the fight that we wanted to see in the fall. Unfortunately, Bohachuk tested positive for COVID. He was out of that. Sergey Bohachuk, of course, 18-0 with 18 knockouts. I was lucky enough to interview him. He has a huge smile on his face. He's a very motivated kid. And then Brandon Adams, of course, we know his story. He's been in there tough. His last fight before this most recent one was against Jermall Charlo. There was some personal things going on. We made it to the bell, but didn't win that fight. And he had to take on Sonny Duverson. This was on Ring City. He knocked him out in 2 rounds. He looked impressive. So I'm very, very, very excited for that matchup. I think of it like a pick-em fight. And so that's going to be the first event, February 25th. And then there's going to be an ongoing string of events in 2021 for Ring City.
Awesome. And you got a great crew, too. You got Sean Porter. You got Papa. I mean, working with these guys that are both experienced, both inside and outside of the ring. But, I mean, how cool is that in the backyard of the parking lot of Wild Card Gym, Hollywood, California?
It was an unbelievable venue, and we cannot forget from the broadcast team the amazing Brian Campbell, BC. We all love BC. Also Todd Harris, who did play-by-play for our third show. All really, really talented announcers. Sean Porter, like you said, Bob Papa. It's been an honor for me to work with these guys. And in terms of your question about Wildcard, I mean, it's one of the most famous boxing gyms in the entire world. And of course, Freddie Roach, everyone knows his story, yes. The amazing rise with Manny Pacquiao. He worked with Miguel Cotto, Amir Khan, so many fighters, down the line. He's one of the best trainers of all time. And I got to interview Freddie, talked to him about it. He called it a dream come true. He loved having the fights there. He liked having the ring in the parking lot. He said he might leave it there. So he definitely enjoyed having Ring City there, and I think we were very thankful to be there as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a spectacle. And we're all looking forward to. I can't wait until we have a live audience there once this COVID hits and we're all clear and safe. But even now, I mean, using even the wall right there for the play-by-play, I mean, very creative. Man, let's talk about the producers behind that. I mean, the creative minds. I mean, anything and everything was available for use. If not, they reinvented it and recruited it and turned it into art.
Yeah, I mean, that's a testament to the hardworking people at Ring City and NBC Sports. Frank Samuel, Jeff Huggins, the founders of Ring City, really, really had a great vision. And I think to your point of It'll be great to have fans there. That's true. But in terms of the initial stages, I think they really thought outside the box in terms of just getting out of a ballroom. And no offense to anyone who's putting on an event in a ballroom, because I know how hard it is to put on a production in normal times. Now, if you want to add in COVID times, it makes it that much more tough. So any kind of venue, I think, is impressive nowadays. But they were able to be visionaries and really think outside of the box. And you saw the projection screens and the graphics, and that's a testament to them. And also the great NBC Sports team, Matt Selly, David Gibson, Eric Weinberger, and the rest of the team for Ring City and for NBC. So it's a really great partnership and a lot of really top minds who are thinking outside of the box. And like I said, it's an honor for me. And I think what's great about working with these guys is they definitely challenge everyone to be their best, and up the game and up the production value and up the storytelling. And I hope we did that. And I'm looking forward to doing that in 2021 also.
Absolutely. You guys put your name right in the hat with the rest of the big league dogs and making an impact. And definitely the viewership is there, and the growth is going to come as you continue to air, man. And I'm excited. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. I think the philosophy can't beat it. It's basically, competitive matchups. And what does every fan want? Boxing fans, we want competitive matchups. That's what everybody wants. I think another thing that Ring City's doing really well is they call it promoter agnostic. And what that means is it's not one network linked up with one promoter.
Yeah.
We all know a major problem in our sport is fragmentation, too many different leagues, too many fighters not fighting the other fighter in the other league. That's a major, major problem. Of course, there's other problems that we would like to tackle in terms of many title belts in the divisions, fighters, getting undefeated records and trying to hold on to those, things like that. The different titles and the different regular champion and super champion. There's so many, fighter safety. I mean, there's so many problems in boxing, but if you're doing competitive matchups, I mean, that's solving one of the problems. And I think Ring City's doing a great job with that, and they have plans to solve some of the other big problems in boxing as well.
Well, that's good. Let's talk about the podcast, Ask the Experts, man. I mean, where did that come from, and when can we watch it? How do we subscribe? How do we link on?
Yeah, absolutely. Ask the Experts is my podcast. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the other providers. You can listen to it there. And then if you want to see the videos of the interviews, it's on my YouTube page, which is youtube.com/Curran Bhatia, CurranBhatia. It's my show where what I wanted to do was not only interview the top fighters in the game, but I also wanted to branch out of that and try to find the interesting angles and the interesting different perspectives in the sport. And that's why I called it Ask the Experts, right? The experts in the game. So, for example, when Anthony Joshua was knocked out by Andy Ruiz, one of my guests on the podcast was the ringside physician, right? Because I wanted to get what is his perspective in terms of things that he looks at for if a fighter has a concussion, right? There's a lot of talk that Joshua didn't look right. Maybe he had a concussion after the first knockdown. Another interesting guest, for an example that I had, was I was lucky enough to interview Deontay Wilder. Wilder, of course, knocked out by Fury. And one of the excuses Wilder made, he said that his outfit that he wore to the ring was too heavy and that weighed him down. And so I was able to find the people who made his outfit, the designers, the fashion designers. And I was able to ask them about that. And I said, tell me about this outfit. How heavy is it? And things like that. So able to get some questions answered that way. So my goal with Ask the Experts podcast and my YouTube page and things like that is just to get the interesting perspectives, the different perspectives that you may not be hearing everywhere else.
Absolutely. Next time somebody's they can't bite down on your mouthpiece, man, you're going to get a hold of the manufacturer and find out why can't we bite down and everybody else is, and that's good because it's just not the norm. Everybody just wants the fighter, but hey, who was your trainer? Who's your nutritionist? Why were you limping? I mean, who made your shoes? And there's a lot of things leading up to it that actually help you get over the hump and also can be a handicap as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different people involved, right, in these fights. Like you said, a trainer, nutritionist, team. And I think obviously that can play such a big factor into everything. I just recently interviewed James Kirkland, who got knocked out in the first round. And obviously such a big part of his story was Ann Wolfe, right? So I asked him about that in terms of the trainer and things like that. So we know how impactful the right team can be around a fighter. So that's my goal. I also like to do some work outside of sports as well. I did a sit down interview with the former CEO of Time Warner. I do some stuff with tech disruptors. I like to talk to industry leaders, things like that. So my goal is just to provide interesting conversations. I love long form interviewing. I love storytelling from in front of the camera. So that's what I want to do.
What was it like, meeting Sugar Ray Leonard? I went on your Instagram, and I saw you sitting next to the great legendary, was standing up with Sugar Ray Leonard. You guys were having a conversation. What was that conversation like, and what was going through your blood, man? You're sitting right next to a legend.
Yeah. I noticed someone liked my 5 or 6 of my posts, and now I know. Yes. Now I know who that was. Yes. No, and thank you for that. Working with Sugar Ray. So that actually was that photo of me and Sugar Ray was the zone card. I believe it was June of 2019 when we were talking about the Anthony Joshua versus the Andy Ruiz fight. Yeah. I was doing some freelance work for the zone, and Sugar Ray was calling the fight, so I was able to kind of work alongside him. That was an honor for me. I mean, such a legend in the game. And a couple things about Sugar Ray. I mean, he's definitely the coolest guy in the room at all times. He's a very knowledgeable guy, and we were able to just watch boxing and chat. We were talking about certain fighters and different things as it was happening live, and then being able to experience that moment of Anthony Joshua knocking down Andy Ruiz. I believe it was in round 3 of that first fight, and then Ruiz coming back and knocking down Joshua. I mean, that arena was absolutely electric. I mean, the first part was the expected part, right? I think we all expected Joshua to do his thing, but then when Ruiz came back, that was the shocking part. And being able to share that moment standing right next to Sugar Ray Leonard, react with him, talk to him. I mean, that's something I'll never forget for sure. Absolutely. And I noticed it wasn't just boxing. I mean, the great A-Rod. I mean, what was it like meeting him? I mean, the guy's a mammoth of a man. Huge guy. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big Yankees fan. I'm a Jets fan as well. Hopefully, it seems like we may be turning things around next year. I guess we'll see. But yeah, so I'm a big Yankees fan. So I was at the Legends charity dinner, which is an annual dinner with a lot of stars there, and I was able to meet A-Rod. That was a thrill for me. I'm big fan of his, big fan of the Yankees. So yeah, that was great. Got to get a photo with A-Rod and meet him and talk to him for a little bit. That was awesome. Loved it. And also getting your question addressed and answered by Nate Diaz and Jorge. I mean, my gosh, they acknowledge exactly who you are, because you don't just cover boxing, you also cover MMA. Talk to us about the transition and how you felt asking these two superstars your question. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I love combat sports, boxing, MMA, whatever it may be, bare knuckle. So whatever the sport is, I do love it. I love other sports as well. I like interviewing athletes from all different sports, and so definitely enjoy covering MMA and UFC as well. I was able to ask Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal questions at the official press conference that came in New York. I really enjoyed that. And what I got to do afterwards, the week of the fight, I got to get an exclusive interview with Jorge Masvidal. This was before his BMF championship fight with Nate Diaz the week of. So it was just amazing to get an exclusive interview. He gave me some time, which was awesome. And obviously in that fight, if you watch that fight, he dominated that fight. He won by a 3rd round stoppage. And I got to witness that at MSG Live. That was a thrill for me. So in terms of the differences of the sport, I mean, obviously it's a totally different discipline, but I think right now we're seeing a lot of synergies in terms of boxing and MMA. We saw the Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather fight. Now there's rumors that Conor McGregor could fight Manny Pacquiao. So there seems to be a lot of different synergies going on. Clarissa Shields, the top women's pound for pound fighter in the game, is dipping her toes into MMA. And so there's a lot of fighters going back and forth. There's a lot of different fighters doing crossover type things. So I think it's an exciting time for both MMA and boxing. Well, today I was noticing that you were nicknamed the Ariel Helwani of boxing. Yeah, someone on Twitter said that I was the Ariel Helwani of boxing. That's an absolute massive compliment for me. That's a tremendous honor. I'm a huge fan of Ariel Helwani and everything he does. I would say Ariel has almost been like a mentor to me. I've been lucky enough to chat with him. He's given me advice. He's helped me along the way. So if I can achieve what he's done, then I would be very, very happy. So that was a huge compliment for me, for someone to compare me to Ariel.
Yeah, shout out to Rick out there. I was reading that. He was also a follower and a big boxing guru, man, a big fan and supporter as well. You know,
absolutely. Shout out to Rick. Thank you, Rick.
I want to ask you about some of these matchups, some of these dream matchups. I mean, you've been watching the sport for a while. I want to ask you, if you have the promoter's hat on today, what 3 fights need to happen, and which fights do you think will happen in 2021? I'm talking about the boxing ring, and then we'll touch a little bit on some MMA.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bunch of big fights that we all want to see in boxing. So I think if you start at the top in terms of heavyweight division, if it is Fury Wilder 3, I think that would be something that a lot of people want to see, just based on the way that the first fight ended up in a draw. The second fight, Fury changed his game plan, bulked up, did what he needed to do, and knocked out Wilder. Wilder's never lost, so there's obviously unfinished business there. But it seems like Wilder may be the odd man out now, and Fury and Joshua would be fighting. I think that would also be an excellent fight. I think they've talked about that being a 2-fight deal possibly. That would be very, very, very exciting. And the reason for that is my understanding is this would be the first time in the 4-belt era that all 4 title belts would be on the line in the heavyweight division and the lineal championship. So it's really like the ultimate undisputed at the top division. That's never happened in the modern era. So I think that's very, very, very exciting, and I hope any of those fights come together, whether it be Fury Joshua, which it seems like that might be next, Fury Wilder 3, or even Joshua Wilder, I think would also be an excellent matchup. I'd love to see that. I think if you go down in weight classes, obviously everyone wants to see Errol Spence versus Terrence Crawford. I mean, they're both undefeated. They're both young. They're both charismatic. They're both doing big things. The problem is what we've talked about, fragmentation, different sides of the street. Hopefully they can come together, make it happen. I think that would be a great thing for the sport, because in terms of different sides of the street, we know that Pacquiao and Mayweather made their fight in 2015, but it was way past its sell-by date, as we know. And so it would be great if these guys could do it in their prime, right? Undefeated in their prime. That would be excellent. And I think also, I mean, we look at Teofimo Lopez versus whoever. I mean, Devin Haney. That'd be a great matchup against Tank. That'd be a great matchup. We got Ryan Garcia in there. I mean, there's so many interesting fights to be made. Lomachenko, obviously, still in the mix. One loss doesn't put you out of the mix by any means. So there's a lot of fights that we want to see in 2021. In terms of what we will see, I mean, it seems like Fury Joshua is in the works, or at least they're talking about it. I read somewhere about step-aside money for Usyk. So yeah, hopefully that comes together in 2021.
And I like the way they're doing things, sign a 2-fight deal. It's almost like when you're going to make a motion picture, I'm going to also sign you up for the sequel, part 2, because whoever loses that fight, you want to see it over again.
No, absolutely. Look, unless it's a draw, someone has to lose, right? We know that. Yeah. So especially in heavyweight boxing, when one punch can change everything, we know about how strong heavyweights are, and anything can happen. No reason to not have another fight. If you look at Wilder Fury, I mean, after the first one, we really wanted a second one. After the second one, we really wanted a third one. So definitely in favor of the 2-fight deal. And I do think it helps in terms of that whole feeling of the pressure is on. And if one guy gets knocked out, he doesn't get his chance. And that's obviously been a huge problem in our sport in terms of sometimes getting those rematches together. So a 2-fight deal would be great.
Absolutely. And just in case we have another controversial decision there. But now we talked about the fights that need to be made. Who do you have in that heavyweight matchup, and why?
So the heavyweight division, obviously very, very, very interesting. If you look at, there's, like we said, any of those guys fighting each other would be very exciting. I think if Wilder fought Fury again, I don't think Fury would run through him the way he did. I'm not sure how that fight would go, but I don't think it would go the exact same way the second fight went. And the reason for that is because obviously now Wilder would be more prepared for a larger Fury coming at him versus obviously in the first fight, Wilder was just trying to find Fury with that right hand. He connected in the 9th round and the 12th round, but wasn't able to get the finish. So that would change. Also, I think it's very interesting when a fighter suffers their first loss, a lot of different things happen, and there's a lot of there's a different way that they react to it, and that might be the time where they start to make changes. We know that he's gotten rid of his trainer. I'm not saying that was the right move or it was the trainer's fault by any means. I think the trainer helped him out there, but either way, it's going through and auditing and realizing what works and what doesn't. So that can sometimes be a good thing. In terms of Joshua versus Wilder, I mean, I think that would be a fantastic fight. We know Joshua has what seems to be the shaky chin, and can Wilder land the right hand. In terms of Joshua Fury, I mean, I still think there's a lot left in Joshua. And I think he is a really great fighter. I think at the end of the day, in terms of the guy that's going to be at the top of this era of heavyweight, will be Joshua, in my opinion. I think he'll be at the end, but I do hope that we get to see all of those matchups so that we can actually say that and say, oh, this guy's the best because he beat the other guys in their prime.
You know what? I like that. I like that analogy. I like all three men. I really do. But I just think that it's when it's all said and done, I think the Gypsy King, man, I like to call him the Larry Bird of boxing, because you see this guy and you're thinking, oh, this guy's not going to do anything. Before you know it, he's taking you to the hole, slam dunking on you. And you're looking up and you're looking at all these championships that Larry Bird won. You see Tyson Fury, and before he made the big name, the big jumps, people looked at him and said, okay, this guy's going to go down like a tree. But he's very agile. He brings a lot to the sport, very intelligent. He sets traps, and that's just my take. But in the heavyweight division, anything can happen, as you know, and as we've been able to witness. And just the fact that we're talking about these three, I like to throw Andy Ruiz's name back into the hat. I'd like to see him maybe with the Deontay Wilder fight. Now, the Tyson Fury fight does take place with Anthony Joshua. I'd like to see Deontay Wilder and Andy Ruiz. What do you think of that matchup, and how do you think it'll play out if and so and when it does happen?
Yeah, I love that matchup. Let's do it. I mean, I also interviewed Adam Kovnowski last year, and I know he had his upset loss, and he's going to get a chance to avenge that. I always want to see
hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd always want to see Kovnowski versus Ruiz. I think that would be a really exciting fight as well. And I do think Ruiz versus Wilder is great too. Two guys, kind of on the, Ruiz obviously trying to get on the comeback. I think to your point, I mean, what makes it so exciting right now is that there's these top guys and they literally all have vulnerabilities. Wilder's been knocked out. Joshua's been knocked out. Ruiz has lost. We saw him, the discipline wasn't there in the rematch against Joshua. Yeah. So he has vulnerabilities in terms of his commitment to the sport. In that, I'm not saying he's not committed now, but at least for that fight, he obviously was not. And then Fury, I mean, Fury was knocked down by Steve Cunningham, who was basically a cruiserweight. We've seen him hurt or in trouble in other situations. So literally they all have vulnerabilities. That's what makes it so exciting. And also Fury's greatest thing against Fury might be himself, right? We know he's come back from these mental health issues. And I think that's tremendous that he's been able to be a champion for that cause and bring awareness to mental health and show that you can get through it. And you can come back from it. And he obviously had ballooned up in weight and he was able to lose that weight and come back. And I think that's such a good thing for mental health awareness, and to just to see someone at the top of this sport doing that is excellent. So, but we do know that demon could still be there, right? And so the vulnerabilities all around make it so exciting. And yeah, throw Ruiz in the mix. Any of those matchups would be excellent. I mean, I think the only one we wouldn't want to see again is probably Joshua Ruiz. It seems like that's kind of resolved itself. That rivalry part has probably resolved itself, but the other guys, I mean, in any other combination would be excellent.
Yeah, I agree with you. The only way we can see that is these two matched up against each other, and when the smoke was clear, these guys and the public demanded it. But Ruiz does have to show, hey, that discipline. I don't want to compare him to Buster Douglas, but it's some heavyweights, they lose the fight outside of the ring, and I won't get into any further details of that because I did speak to Andrew Ruiz, and he is working with a nutritionist, and hopefully we can see him back in the ring soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. I mean, he's got the hand speed. He's an excellent fighter. He's been fighting from a young age, and that makes a huge difference. And Wilder and Joshua found boxing a little later, and Ruiz fighting at a young age. That muscle memory and those skills. I've talked to people who worked with him at Wildcard and elsewhere early on, and they knew this kid was special, especially with that hand speed. He's definitely going to be dangerous.
Absolutely. Now, here's the one a lot of people want to talk about, and I mean, picking a winner, you really can't have a loser in this, but in boxing, yes, only one can be victorious, and that's Bud Crawford and Errol Spence. How do you see that fight taking place if, in fact, the contracts are on the paper? the pin, the pad, and everything's happening.
Yeah, that's the fight before the fight, right? Getting that fight in the ring.
Absolutely.
So let's assume just for conversation's sake, just for hypothetical, that they are able to come to an agreement and have that fight right now, or at least for 2021. I mean, obviously it's a fascinating matchup. So I think that's going to be, obviously, I mean, it's common knowledge. That's going to be a very, very competitive fight. The thing with Spence was he was on top of the game. He had the car accident. And obviously we were all curious, how is he going to come back from this horrific car accident? Right. I mean, he didn't know if he was going to walk again. And I was lucky enough to be on the PBC Countdown show and produce the show between him and Danny Garcia and preview that. So
yes, great job, by the way. Great job, by the way. I did watch that series as well.
Thank you. Yeah. So that was great to be a part of and tell that story. And I think Danny Garcia was a great test there for Errol Spence. And what we learned actually was it was not the same Errol Spence. It was actually a better Errol Spence. And what I mean by that is he now wasn't taking anything for granted, and he was even more motivated. If you look at his body, he was ripped, he was chiseled even well before the fight, because he wanted this so badly, right? To prove the doubters, to prove to himself that he could do it again, to prove it for his family, to his kids. And he shut out Danny Garcia, and Danny Garcia is no slouch. I mean, he's like an A- fighter in the division. He's right there at the top. So he was able to do that. Terrence Crawford at the same time. I mean, people talk about the drawing power of Errol Spence's pay-per-view buys versus Terrence Crawford. I think it's also about who is available in those leagues, right? That is available to fight. So I think Errol Spence had an opportunity to fight more well-known names because they were in the PBC family that were top fighters in the division or marketable fighters. And I think also obviously having that Fox marketing machine behind them and getting those primetime shows out there and getting the exposure in that way obviously helps. So I think in terms of talent, I mean, they're right up there. I don't even know who I would pick. I mean, I think that would be a 50-50 fight. I think they're both excellent fighters, but the one controversial thing I'll say, or the one thing I will take a stand on, is that I think it's closer to a 50-50 matchup in terms of what they bring to the table. I think the reason Spence has outdrawn Crawford in terms of numbers is because of the fighters that were available and the marketing machine behind him. I think if you throw Crawford in there and say, okay, Crawford, now you're going to fight Danny Garcia, you're going to fight Mikey Garcia, you're going to fight all the other people, that Errol Spence did, and have that same marketing machine, I think it would be a similar type of buys and numbers. That's just my opinion.
Hey, that's a great illustration there. Now let's talk about that third matchup.
In terms of Teofimo?
Yes. I mean, you see him in Tank. You see him in maybe Ryan Garcia. What else is out there for him? Do you see him moving up, maybe taking on the winner of Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez?
Yeah, I mean, any of those fights would be amazing. Teofimo, got to spend some time with him. He definitely showed us who he is in that Lomachenko fight. I don't think anyone in the world expected that except for Teofimo and maybe his dad. That was such an impressive performance. I was very, very impressed by Teofimo. He's obviously the real deal at such a young age, and now we get to watch this great fighter for a while now, maybe a decade, maybe more. So that's going to be really exciting. I don't know who's next. It sounds like Ryan Garcia versus Tank was kind of in the works. They both tweeted, or they both put on Instagram fan fight posters of each other. So you thought that was coming next. Then Ryan Garcia tweeted and he said, I have a huge fight announcement coming up. And Tank was like, wait a minute, I haven't heard anything. So then there was rumors that it's Ryan Garcia versus Manny Pacquiao, because he said it was a bigger fight than Tank. I honestly, I don't know which one of those guys is going to fight the other. Devin Haney versus Ryan Garcia have that history in the amateurs. If you talk to one guy, they say they had the best of it. If you talk to the other, they said that they had the best of it. Obviously any mix of those guys would be amazing. I was very impressed by Tank in his fight against Leo Santa Cruz. Leo Santa Cruz is someone, it's hard to hurt him, and he throws so many punches, so it's hard to beat him in that way. And I thought he was gonna give Tank problems. And it was a close fight. I believe off memory, it was 48-47 on all the scorecards. So maybe a 1 point difference on every single scorecard.
Exactly. Very competitive.
Yeah. And so very competitive. And then obviously Tank found that uppercut from the other, another dimension, and did what he had to do against Leo Santa Cruz. So I was very impressed by that. So, I don't know who's going to fight who next. But I think it's just exciting to be a boxing fan and see that those matchups are possible. And hopefully we get some of those in 2021.
I hope so too. I'll be brief. The one in the heavyweight division is the one I want to see, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. I mean, let the winner come home with all the bouts and reign as undisputed champion of the world. I mean, the days of only one bout and all these different governing bodies, it's just scattered. And I know there's a lot of talent out there, but we just have to adjust to the change of times. And
it's very frustrating as a fan or an observer of the sport in terms of the title belts, because since there are so many different entities, right? Yeah. You may want to unify your belt, or you may be willing to fight the next best person. But if that person isn't the next person ranked with one of your belts, right, they may not recognize that fight, or you have to, they may strip you because you're not fighting the right person for them. But how are you supposed to fight the right person for that organization when the other organization has a different ranking? So it's not even just about the fighter's willingness to fight or the promoter's willingness or ability to create those fights. Right now, it's about also these rankings and in terms of the different organizations stripping fighters and things like that. And then you have the other different types of championship belts that get in the way, like franchise championship belts, super regular, all of these things. So to your point, it would be great if we could just have one champion per division. I think that would definitely help the sport get more mainstream sports fans and followers. I think people who watch sports as a mainstream, when there is a big boxing fight on, I think they get invested and interested in it. But I think to keep those fans long-term, I think that would be one of the things that would help, having one main guy per division.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to pick a winner, and I'm going to get a little creative here. Okay. And we're talking about Bud Crawford and Errol Spence. I have Bud Crawford winning at 147 pounds, but I have Errol Spence winning at 154 pounds.
Yeah, I think that's you know what, I could get behind that, and I know where you're going with that. Obviously, Spence being the bigger guy, yes, looks like he would be more comfortable at a higher weight. If you look at just Crawford's body type, right, it doesn't seem like necessarily he would necessarily be comfortable at that higher weight. We saw him be dominant at the lower weights and then moving his way up. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting take. I guess, you know, obviously we'd have to see what weight they sign to fight if they do. Yeah. I knew that they do have some type of a relationship. I was talking to Terrence Crawford at one of his media days, and he mentioned that after the Spence car accident, he did text Spence. And so I do think at least that's a really, really good sign that they have some line of direct communication. If you remember when Pacquiao and Mayweather were negotiating, it seemed like the thing that actually got it over the line was that they were both at a basketball game.
Yes,
and they were able to have and they were able to have direct conversation in a hotel room after. There's obviously the famous story of Ali and Frazier talking before one of their rematches or trilogy fights. And so the fact that there is a direct line of communication, I think, helps in a huge way. And so clearly they have each other's numbers. And so hopefully that can happen. Or there's always the possibility that we've seen the comments that Bob Arum made about Crawford. I'm sure there was a reason. Bob Arum doesn't do anything by accident, so I'm sure there's a reason he said that. And I guess that opens it up to where Crawford could go in the future. And if he is on the same side of the street as Errol Spence, or Errol Spence somehow ends up on the same side of the street as him, obviously that makes it much more likely.
Well, one person I do not want to overlook, well, there's two. Okay, I'm going to throw two more names out there, and we won't match them up just yet. But also, you know what? It could be a great matchup. Is I don't want to overlook Sean Porter, or I don't want to overlook Mikey Garcia, who's back in the gym and getting ready to drop some news soon. And look for that show to come out next Tuesday. We're going to have him on the Fighter's Voice. I'm looking forward to that. So, but I don't want to overlook those gentlemen at 147. I mentioned
both great fighters. I can't say enough good things about Sean Porter. I've been lucky enough to work alongside with him at Ring City and commentate on fights with him. He has just a brilliant fighter's mind. He's one of the toughest outs in boxing. He's in your face. And I think he would be a top competitor in any of those fights. Now, if you look at his fight with Spence, it was so close. And I asked Sean Porter about that knockdown in round 11 when Spence, they both were throwing the same punch. Spence has got there a little sooner. Yeah. And if you look at that replay, you can see Porter's eyes kind of go to the back of his head. Now, I think any other fighter in the division probably would have been knocked out cold there. And I think it was Sean Porter's strength that even kept him up and kept him in that fight. He was able to make it to the end there. And Mikey Garcia, man, he's a brilliant tactical fighter. He obviously flew a little bit too close to the sun with Errol Spence. He moved up a little bit too high, but absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, with challenging yourself, with daring to be great. I give him all the credit in the world for trying to do that, especially as an undefeated fighter. He gets so much credit for challenging himself as an undefeated fighter. And he's such a technical, sharp fighter. He's probably the most precise fighter in the game. He lands those shots exactly. I've heard Robert Garcia and others say that he may not have the same punching power as other people, but he hurts you more because of the way he's so accurate, and he lands that punch exactly where he wants to land it. And so he's definitely in the conversation, and I'm excited to see what he does as well.
Yeah, and him and Manny Pacquiao, I mean, I could be here all day. We could be here all day. Him and Manny Pacquiao would be a great matchup, but that's a whole different story. Now, one fight, a dream fight for me, would be Alvarez and David Benavidez at 168. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great fight. So I think I would have. I obviously have a lot of respect for Benavidez, excellent fighter. And I think I would have thought it would be an even closer fight before I saw what Canelo did in his last fight. And what I mean by that is he's fighting Callum Smith, who's like a true 168 pounder, right? Like a big guy.
Easily could be 175. Yes, I agree.
Exactly. And the way that Canelo just had no problems at all in that fight. And I also think that was, in some part, an issue with Callum Smith having absolutely no plan B, didn't seem to use his length. He almost, I tweeted this during the fight, he almost did the opposite of what you should do as the taller, bigger guy. He didn't work the jab from range. He didn't try to use his length, right? He was crouching down almost to Canelo's level. So it almost seemed like he was undoing his size advantage. Exactly. But at the same time, Canelo gets credit for making him do that, right? No one else has made him do that before. He's never lost before. So Canelo gets a ton of credit for doing that.
Exactly.
So with that said, I mean, I also would, I have a lot of respect for Brian Kenny, but I have to tremendously disagree with him in that you can't say that just because Canelo moved up and beat Sergey Kovalev that he wasn't a title holder at that division, because Kovalev had a title belt right at that time. Now, just because he wasn't the recognized best fighter in the division, that doesn't take away from Canelo getting that title belt. And the reason is, I understand his point, right? You want to say that you fought the best guy in the division, therefore you have the belt. But then if you're going to go that way, then you have to do that uniformly, right? And then you have to say that only the one guy, the consensus guy, is the champion, and that no one has that many title defenses or belts or things like that unless they fought that one guy in the division. So you have to be consistent with that. So Canelo gets credit for that too. He went up to 175 and he knocked out a 175 pounder in Kovalev. So with that said, I mean, it doesn't seem like a good strategy to bet against Canelo Alvarez in his prime. We're seeing what he's able to do. And I think I would probably stick to that. If he's going to, I'm trying to think of people that would give him a tough time. I still feel like Triple G in that mythical third fight would have the best chance, in my opinion. I know that Triple G is older now, closer to 40 than he is 35. And we know that he's an aging star. But I think the reason I think that the Triple G versus Canelo fight, the third fight, if it happens, would be the most competitive of possible Canelo matchups. Or you know what? I would take that back. Against a Charlo, I think against Charlo, that would be also very competitive. But the reason I think Triple G would be very, very competitive is because Triple G's competitive professional life, right, has basically been based off of most recently based off of a loss and a draw to Canelo, right? Those are the blemishes on his record. So mentally, as a fighter, when you've had so much success, you've been this global superstar the way Triple G has, and you have these two blemishes, that's all you think about every day. And I think that extra motivation will be there. I'm not saying I necessarily know who wins that fight. I think it depends when it happens. But I do think that would still be a very competitive matchup, Canelo versus Triple G.
Well, there's a clock on that one. And if that day, does take place, I'd like to see if we can bring Alvarez all the way down to 160s, because it's going to be tough. And that way we can kind of even the score, because that window is closing and Father Time is undefeated. Now, to also, the Kovalev, the victory, you got to remember, Sugar Ray Leonard moved all the way up, and when he beat Donnie Lalonde for the light heavyweight bout, and had Lalonde come down in weight at a catch weight. So, but Sugar Ray Leonard was still recognized and immediately forfeited the bout. But that was a bout that he wanted to accomplish, and he was trying to be the first. And Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy the Hitman Hearns beat him by a couple of days by knocking out Rodan. And as you know, Tommy Hearns was able to move up to light heavies in his frame. He was able to hold the weight a little better. And that's why I do think that if they, when I say they, Crawford and Spence were to compete at 154, I definitely would have to give the advantage to Spence because he is the bigger man. And I think the best is yet to come. We're going to see the 154 division just light up.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, I think the bottom line that we're saying for all of these mythical matchups is it depends when it happens because, as you said, Father Time is undefeated. We know this. It depends when it happens, and then it obviously depends on the weight and what weight those fighters have been fighting at, what they can adjust to, things like that. So there's a lot of variables obviously in play here.
You know, I'm going to squeeze one in before we move on to our main event. I wanted to cover more MMA, man, but I already know in my mind, I'm already thinking it's not if, it's when I'm going to have you back on the show so we can talk about the beautiful, sweet science and also cage fighting, and that's MMA. But I got to squeeze this in. This fight needs to take place. We're talking about two undefeated men, two Olympians in the prime of their career, the same weight division, and one will come out unified, and that's the Avenal kid himself, Jose Carlos Ramirez, and my man, Josh Taylor.
Yeah, I mean,
needs to take place.
That's you know, another fight on everyone's list. We always want to see undefeated fighters, you know, square off. And so I think, yeah, I mean, let's add that to the list of what we want this year. I've always said that as fans, we need to demand the best fights in terms of every time you see a promoter, every time you see a fighter. Obviously it's different now because you know, we're not going to live events in the same way that we used to. Obviously it's limited capacity and things like that. But it's important for us to stand up as fans and demand the best fights, because we don't want to end up in a situation where there's just different leagues and one guy fighting not the best opposition and then past their prime eventually fights that top guy from the other side of the street. So it'd be great if that matchup happens as well.
Now let's talk about this weekend. Conor McGregor, the rematch, Dustin. I mean,
yeah.
What a facelift. What an improvement. How do you see this fight panning out, and who do you see victorious?
Yeah. So I think anytime Conor McGregor fights, I mean, I think it's a huge moment for MMA, for UFC. And we mentioned Ariel Helwani earlier. I believe it was Ariel who said this, and you know, apologize if I'm wrong, but I think he was one of the first to say this, is like, Conor deserves so much credit for what he's done in UFC that it's almost like he almost doesn't get enough credit for how good of a fighter he actually is. So I you know, I'm going to be picking Conor in basically most fights that he's in, almost all of them, depending on who the opponent is, unless it's a rematch with Khabib Nurmagomedov. I think obviously Khabib's in retirement, but if that rematch was to happen, I'd have to, you know, give that a long give that a long think about how that would go down. Conor would have to make some massive adjustments. But Conor, I mean, is just so dominant when he's on. He's obviously had a lot of issues outside of the cage, lawsuits, things like that. Yes. You know, some violence here and there and things like that. And that's obviously not a good look. Now, I think if you look at the Conor that fought Khabib, that was a very unfocused, not disciplined Conor. Now, I'm not saying if he was focused or disciplined, he would have beat Khabib. Because obviously Khabib is just, you know, undefeated, top of the game, one of the best MMA fighters of all time. But you do have to look at that in terms of motivation. You know, Conor was drinking at the press conference, things like that.
Lit. He was lit at the press conference.
Yeah, and so you could see kind of where his mind was at. It wasn't, wasn't as sharp as it could be in terms of his training and things like that. You know, he had taken time to go to boxing to fight Mayweather. And so, you know, it was just a different mindset. Right. And so if you look at the Conor that fought, I believe it was January of last year against Cowboy. I mean, he looked fantastic. He knocked him out in the fight was stopped in 40 seconds. And I think Conor did a lot of work in terms of just preparation, taking it seriously. That was a different Conor. It was a different Conor. And I think
more respectful, more polite. And that was a different Conor, even at the press conference.
Yeah, more respectful, more polite, but also just significantly more focused. You could see it in his training, and I think also from a mental approach as well. I mean, he had Tony Robbins in his corner, so he was learning from him as well, just from a mental, positive mindset approach, right? And I think that was super helpful for him. And so it seems like that's the same guy coming into this fight. He's fighting Poirier. It's a rematch. The first fight was a long time ago. I believe it was 6 years ago. So you're not necessarily sure if anything's going to be, from the first fight plays into the second fight. But what I can say is, I mean, we've seen Conor light up the sport. He's changed the game. He's gotten fighters paid in a different way. He's become just must-watch entertainment, must-watch TV. He transcended MMA and became this huge global star. His brand, and I think obviously I know he wasn't competitive necessarily in that Mayweather fight, but I do give him a lot of credit for someone making their pro debut in boxing. And able to at least get in there with the ring, into the ring with one of the best boxers of all time in Mayweather. And I think he did have, very few, but small moments of success. I think a lot of people say, Mayweather carried Conor probably maybe a little bit, but I don't think Mayweather wanted to be caught with that uppercut in round one. And if you look at about that. Yeah. And if you look at the stats for that fight, McGregor actually landed more punches than I believe Miguel Cotto did, than Manny Pacquiao did, than Marquez did, than a lot of top fighters. And Mayweather actually changed his strategy, where we know Mayweather is the defensive technical genius, right? The best defensive fighter in the game. He moved forward in that fight to beat Conor. Yes, and so he gets a ton of credit for that. But I give a ton of credit to Conor for making your pro debut against one of the best fighters of all time, and being able to even last 10 rounds. I think that's a tremendous accomplishment there.
He gave a great account of himself, made non-believers into believers. And I didn't attend the fight, but I was in Vegas week of, and the energy was just through the roof. I mean, they don't just support Conor. They love Conor. Conor's their president wherever you go. And then you have the Mayweather supporters. It was great for a sport of boxing. A lot of people disagree, but it was great for the sport of boxing. It was great for martial arts, and it was great entertainment.
It was absolutely a great entertainment, a great show. And I think also just the press conferences and the lead up to that event, right? What they had the national tour, the actually worldwide tour. Yes. And just seeing that dynamic, I thought was so fascinating. And I think it was different than a lot of the Floyd Mayweather fights and press conferences that we're used to. We're used to seeing him mostly against kind of quieter, respectful opponents. Like if you look at Manny Pacquiao, he's very respectful in his post-fight lead up. Miguel Cotto, the same way. I mentioned Marquez. And down the line, so many of those opponents were a little bit more on the quiet side. They were also, a lot of times happy to be there. I worked on the 24/7 with Mayweather and Victor Ortiz. Victor Ortiz had never really fought at that high of a level. He was just happy to be there in a way. We had footage of him walking down, the back stages of MGM Grand, looking around at the posters, kind of in awe, right? Taking it in because it was his first time at that level. He checked into his hotel room. It was the first time to be in that like championship suite type thing. So that's what a lot of the opponents for Mayweather were. Now, if you look at that first press conference with Conor and Mayweather, I think when Conor walked out and he had his suit on, he had the FU pinstripes and he's kind of he's dancing and he's cool. I think Mayweather was just a little bit like, whoa, okay, hold on, who is this right now? And I think that was a really, really interesting moment because it was someone who, yes, okay, obviously Conor is not nearly as skilled in terms of just boxing as Mayweather, but in terms of if they got in a street fight, that would be a whole different game. If they fought in an octagon, I don't think anyone has any doubt that Conor would wipe the floor with Mayweather, right? And obviously Mayweather would wipe the floor with Conor in a boxing ring. But I think that had to play into the dynamic of that, just in terms of a man-to-man, not only what can be done in physical combat, but also what was done in mental combat in terms of the smack talk. And obviously Conor at the top of the game with that too. So that was definitely a fascinating build-up to an event.
There was two times there. First of all, I want to give Ray Flores a shout. He did a great job at behind the microphone, behind the podium, hyping it up. So great job with Ray Flores. There was two different times when Conor had Floyd's bag full of money. And I'm thinking he's actually going to throw it out. And there was a look of concern with Floyd. Like, if you throw it out, we're fighting today, right now. There was that. And what set Conor off was when Floyd had the flag. And he said, "Don't you dare drop it." He said, he just said, "Don't you dare drop." And that was out of script. That was, forget the BS, don't you drop that flag, or this fight isn't taking place. It's happening now. So leading up to it, man, it was awesome.
It was a fascinating dynamic. And I remember the moment Conor took the bag and took it out and he said, "Oh, there's only $5,000 in here. What is this?" And definitely with the flag as well. Obviously Conor has the Irish pride as anyone would for their country. And I think what made it that much more interesting, though, is that neither man really wanted to jeopardize this huge payday that they were about to get. And so they didn't cross the line too far. There was that moment that I do believe was a real, absolutely real moment, which was, I believe it was at the New York press conference. And
when he rubbed his head?
Not when he rubbed his head.
You remember that?
I do remember that at the UK one where he rubbed his head. I think that, I'm guessing, I don't know this at all, but I'm guessing that there was some kind of terms that they couldn't touch each other beforehand. I think they probably let that one go as more of a playful thing. But the moment that I think was a real moment was when they were at the Brooklyn press conference, and Mayweather said some code word, and his bodyguards rushed Conor's side and kind of surrounded him. And if you look at Dana White's face, he was completely red after. He was very, very angry, very upset, because I feel like he felt like their side crossed the line. And I think that seemed to me like a real moment, like an intimidation practice.
Yes.
That maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, I'm not sure. But that seemed to be like, because part of it, obviously, when they stand across each other and they put out their hand and point to each other, that's obviously acting, and that's obviously something that they talked about beforehand. But things like that, there's definitely real moments mixed in there that made it more interesting.
Absolutely. Well, Curran, we can go on and on, man. I mean, you're like a boxing encyclopedia, and also MMA, man. It just comes out so fluently and so natural. It's turning into a garage conversation, which I love, and that's the platform where I like to get, because the podcast allows you just to relax yourself and pull out what's inside of you. And I'm glad we got to share with you and how you started, and who was making impacts as far as these producers and engineers and directors in your life. And you started from the ground up. You paid your dues, and your work ethic spoke for itself, which leads you now on the other side of the camera. So I got to have you back, Curran. I appreciate you taking the time. And after this, I'm going to go subscribe to your YouTube channel, man. And I'm going to get on and I'm going to follow you. So I appreciate you taking time with your busy schedule and being our guest here on the Fighter's Voice Kick-Ass podcast.
Yeah, I'll definitely be back anytime. It's been great chatting with you. Like you said, anytime you can just chat about fights or anything else and just keep it going. To anyone who is watching, yeah, that'd be great. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Curran Bhatia. You can follow my personal channels on Instagram and Twitter at Curran Bhatia, at CurranBhatia. And the podcast is Ask the Experts. It's ATE_podcast on Instagram and Twitter. And of course, lucky enough to be working with the great Ring City team, Ring City USA. You can catch it on NBC Sports Network. You can catch it on Twitch. You can catch it a bunch of places. And it's an honor for me to work with the Ring City team, and looking forward to big things with Ring City in 2021 for sure.
After we get off this line, I'm going to text you and I'm going to ask for your size, because I didn't get to view it here, but I'll show you. I got to send you out one of these shirts, man.
Oh, yeah, please, man. Send that over. Absolutely. That's great.
Definitely got to get that out to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank our guest today, Curran Bhatia, making time for the Fighter's Voice. Remember, every fighter has a voice, and so do you. Don't forget to subscribe. I appreciate all the support. That's www.youtube.com/thefightersvoice. Remember, every fighter has a voice, and so do you. It's a wrap. Thumbs up for Richie.
Thank you.
Okay, fight fans, it's not goodbye, but until next week.
Remember.
It's always voiceography at its finest. So on behalf of Richard Ortiz, Cole Escovedo, the special guests, and all the crew right here at the Kick-Ass Podcast, saying hasta luego, babies. And always, thanks for listening.